The city was alive with the usual hum of people rushing through the streets. Cars honked, people talked, and the noise of everyday life filled the air. In the middle of it all, a man sat alone on a bench, almost invisible. He wore a plain black jacket and jeans, his dark hair slightly messy. His eyes, though, were sharp, too sharp for someone who seemed so ordinary. No one paid him any attention as they walked by, caught up in their own lives, but there was something unsettling about the way he sat still. He looked calm, but anyone who knew the signs would understand that this man was far from ordinary. He wasn't supposed to be noticed. He was trained not to be noticed. For years he had lived in plain sight, blending in with the world around him. His name was unknown to anyone, his history erased. In fact, no record of him existed. He had no past, no family, no ties to anyone. But if you knew where to look, you'd realize the truth. This man was one of the deadliest soldiers humanity had ever created. He was one of the ghosts. The term ghost wasn't something the public would ever hear, nor would they ever know the program existed. It was classified, hidden deep in the shadows of government secrets. Ghost soldiers were trained from childhood, modified and enhanced to be the perfect warriors, silent, fast, and deadly. They were humanity's secret weapon, but they were also humanity's secret shame. No one was supposed to know they existed, not even the soldiers themselves, until the day they were called into action. And that day was close. The man on the bench had been waiting for years, blending in, watching the world. His eyes scanned the street, his senses heightened. He could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching from behind, and without turning, he knew exactly who it was. A group of men, dressed in suits, were walking toward him. He recognized them immediately. They were not just ordinary people, but operatives from the underground organization that controlled the city. They were looking for something or someone. They were looking for him. As they got closer, the man stood up slowly. His movements were smooth, deliberate. He didn't hurry, but there was no hesitation. The moment he rose to his full height, the group of men stopped. They looked at him with a mixture of confusion and recognition, but they didn't speak. They were too trained, too disciplined to make the first move. The silence stretched for a long moment before the leader of the group, a tall man with a thin mustache, spoke. "You're not supposed to be here," the man said in a low voice. "Walk away, and we'll pretend we didn't see you." The ghost didn't respond. Instead, his eyes locked onto the man's, and in that brief exchange, the leader knew. He knew exactly who he was facing. This wasn't an ordinary man. This was a soldier, a weapon, and he had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. A smile tugged at the corner of the ghost's lips, but it wasn't a friendly one. The group of men tensed, sensing the danger in the air. They had been trained to deal with threats, but even they knew when they were outmatched. The ghost was far more than they could handle. He could kill them all in a matter of seconds, and they knew it. The leader of the group took a step back, reaching into his jacket for something. But before he could make a move, the ghost was already in motion. His body moved like a blur, too fast for anyone to track. In the blink of an eye, the ghost had closed the distance between them. He grabbed the leader by the collar, lifting him off the ground effortlessly. "Don't make me repeat myself," the ghost said, his voice low and cold. "You were never meant to find me." The group of men stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The ghost's grip tightened, but not enough to break the man's neck. Yet, the leader's face turned pale, and he struggled to breathe. His hands grabbed at the ghost's arm, but there was no strength in his movements. Finally, the leader managed to rasp out, "Who are you?" The ghost stared into his eyes. "I'm the one they hide from you." With a sharp motion, he dropped the man to the ground, watching as the group scrambled to their feet. They were out of their depth, out of their league. Without another word, the ghost turned and walked away, blending back into the crowd as easily as he had appeared. His mission was not yet complete. There were still shadows to move through, more enemies to face, but for now, He remained just another ordinary person in the city, a ghost among millions. And no one would ever know what he truly was. Not yet. But soon, the world would. You said, the ghost's past was buried deep in the vaults of a classified military project known only to a select few. It was called Project Ghost, and it was the most ambitious and secret operation in the history of humanity. For decades, the government had been working on creating the perfect soldiers, but these soldiers were not made for open warfare. They were made for something much darker, something much more covert. These were soldiers who could disappear into society, blend in with the crowd, and strike when least expected. They were the last line of defense against an enemy humanity could never truly prepare for. The project had started years ago with the goal of creating soldiers who could act as silent protectors, the ultimate guardians for a world that was growing increasingly vulnerable. They weren't designed to wear uniforms or wield massive weapons in the open. They were designed to live among the people, hidden in plain sight, and wait for the call to action when disaster struck. As a child, the Ghost had been one of the first to be selected for the program. He had been taken from his family and brought to a remote facility, isolated from the outside world. There, they had trained him and others like him to be more than human. They altered their bodies, enhancing their strength, speed, and reflexes to superhuman levels. Their minds were sharpened, their senses heightened to the point where they could hear the faintest footsteps in a crowded room or see a single movement in the shadows. They were perfect in every way, except for one thing: they didn't know they were perfect. They were told they were part of an experiment, but their true purpose was hidden from them. They were not soldiers, they were weapons. The Ghost had grown up with his fellow soldiers, but they had been told nothing of their real mission. They had been trained in combat, surveillance, and espionage, but each one of them had been kept in the dark about the world beyond the walls of the facility. They lived under the strictest control, with no connections to the outside world. Their identities were erased, and when they were ready, they were sent into society, disguised as ordinary civilians. But even in plain clothes, the Ghost and the others were not ordinary. The moment they stepped into the world, their training kicked in. They observed, analyzed, and assessed every situation they encountered. Their instincts were flawless, their movements precise. To the world, they were just people. But beneath the surface, they were something far more dangerous. The Ghost had spent years in hiding, never revealing his true nature to anyone. He had seen wars and conflicts come and go, but he had never been called into action. The world had been at peace, or at least, that's what the public believed. What they didn't know was that there was always an unseen threat lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was during a routine mission, one that seemed like any other, when the Ghost's world began to unravel. He was sent to track a series of mysterious disappearances, nothing more than a simple surveillance operation. But what he found was far from ordinary. The people he was watching weren't just disappearing, they were being taken. And they were being taken by people who knew how to disappear just as he did. The Ghost's mission quickly escalated. He followed the trail deeper into the underground world of covert operations, and soon, he uncovered a truth that shook him to his core. The disappearances were part of a larger plan, a conspiracy involving high-ranking officials who had their own secret program. One that mirrored Project Ghost, but with far darker intentions. These soldiers were not like him. They had been created for a different purpose: to destroy, to manipulate, and to control. As he dug deeper, the Ghost realized that the very people who had created him were now his enemies. The truth hit him like a wave, and for the first time, he questioned everything he had ever known. Was he just a tool, a weapon to be used? Or was he something more, something human, something that could make his own choices? But there was no time to dwell on those questions. The mission was far from over, and the clock was ticking. The Ghost had to stop the rogue faction before they could put their plans into motion, and he had to do it alone. No one knew about the rogue soldiers. No one could be trusted. It was up to him to uncover the full extent of the threat and put an end to it, before humanity's hidden weapons were used against them. As he prepared to confront this new enemy, the ghost understood one thing: he couldn't hide forever. The world was on the brink of chaos, and the people who had created him had their own dark agenda. He would have to confront his past, face the shadows, and make a choice that would decide the future of humanity. But for now, he was still hidden in plain sight, walking among the people, waiting for the moment when the world would need him. The call came unexpectedly. The ghost was going about his day, doing nothing out of the ordinary, when his communication device buzzed. The message was simple: time to move. There was no explanation, no further instructions, just the cold certainty that the mission had begun. His heart rate barely increased. It had never been about excitement. For someone like him, a ghost, everything was calculated, planned, and executed with precision. He didn't question orders. He followed them. He stood up from his quiet corner in the cafe, scanning the area with trained eyes. Every person in the room was a potential threat, a potential ally, or simply a distraction. His instincts were always on high alert, even in the most mundane situations. The device vibrated again in his pocket, a second message confirming his next steps. The target had been located. It was not a person this time, but a location, a warehouse deep within the city's industrial district. The building was surrounded by high fences, security guards, and cameras. On the surface, it appeared to be an ordinary facility, perhaps a storage area for shipping goods. But the ghost knew better. Behind the walls, something far more dangerous was happening. This was not an ordinary mission. His previous operations had always been about surveillance, quiet observation, or gathering intelligence. This time, the ghost was being called to stop something before it could escalate. A rogue faction of the government's secret project was operating out of this warehouse. They were manufacturing something that could bring down entire governments, something that could be used to control the population in ways no one had ever imagined. The ghost didn't have the luxury of time. He had been ordered to infiltrate the facility, gather intel, and if necessary, eliminate the threat. But there were too many unknowns, too many variables in play. He had no backup, no reinforcements. It was just him, against an unknown enemy with resources beyond what he could have imagined. With a deep breath, the ghost activated his camouflage system, a set of hidden devices in his clothing that bent light and sound to make him nearly invisible. To anyone who saw him, he was nothing more than a passing shadow, blending perfectly into the background. He moved quickly, slipping between parked cars and dark alleyways, taking the quickest route to the target. Every step was calculated, every move precise. As he neared the warehouse, he could feel the tension building in his chest. This was not just another mission. He could sense it. His instincts told him this would be different. The walls of the warehouse loomed ahead, tall and imposing. It was guarded by men with weapons, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of trouble. The ghost was not concerned about the guards. He was trained for situations like this. He had faced worse odds, taken down larger groups. But something in the air felt wrong, like an unseen presence watching him, waiting for him to make the first move. The ghost crouched low behind a stack of crates, his eyes studying the entrance. There were 3 guards standing watch, their backs to him. He could take them out without a sound, but the real challenge was getting inside without being detected. He needed to know what was inside that warehouse, what the rogue faction was hiding. If they were building weapons, he needed to stop them. If they were planning an attack, he needed to find out where and when. With calculated precision, the ghost moved closer. His feet barely made a sound on the cold concrete, and his breathing was slow and controlled. He reached the edge of the warehouse and slipped inside through a small, unnoticed gap in the metal door. The interior was dark, but his enhanced vision cut through the shadows like a knife. He could make out the faint outlines of crates and machinery stacked high against the walls. The air inside was thick with the smell of oil and metal. It was a typical industrial warehouse, but there was something off about it. The deeper he went, the more he felt that sense of wrongness pressing against him. The walls were lined with crates that were far too well secured for simple storage. And then, in the center of the room, he saw it, a large, metallic structure, its purpose unclear but ominous. It was surrounded by several men in lab coats, overseeing the work of a few others. The ghost approached, his mind racing. This wasn't just a weapons factory. It was something far worse. He observed the workers, noting their movements, their purpose. They were building something designed to manipulate the human mind. He didn't know how yet, but he could feel it. This wasn't just about power. It was about control. And this time, the people behind it weren't just criminals. They were the very government that had created him. Before he could gather more information, the door to the warehouse suddenly slammed open. The ghost froze, his heart skipping a beat. The sound echoed through the cavernous space, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the floor. Someone else was here, someone who had the same objective as him, or perhaps a different one. Either way, it meant the situation had just become a lot more complicated. The ghost quickly ducked behind a stack of crates, his body going still as he listened. His mind raced, analyzing every possible move. Whoever had entered the warehouse would be looking for something just like him. They could be allies or enemies. There was no time to figure it out. The mission had just escalated, and now he had to move faster than ever before. With a deep breath, the ghost pushed forward into the shadows, preparing to face whatever or whoever had just entered. The game had changed. The stakes had been raised. And he had no choice but to finish the mission, or risk everything. The atmosphere inside the warehouse grew tense, the air thick with the weight of unknown danger. The ghost stayed hidden, crouched low behind the crates, his mind working at lightning speed to assess the situation. He knew time was running out. The footsteps that had echoed through the warehouse earlier were getting closer, and whoever was approaching was not moving like a typical guard. Their steps were quick, urgent, almost as if they were searching for something specific or someone. From the shadows, the ghost peered around the corner of the crate. He saw them. Two men, their faces obscured by the hoods of their dark jackets, moving through the room with military precision. They weren't part of the original security detail. These men were different, more experienced, more dangerous. The ghost's instincts flared. These were the ones he needed to watch out for. He had seen their type before. Black Ops agents, the kind who specialized in high-risk, high-stakes operations. They weren't here to observe. They were here to take control. The ghost's pulse quickened, but his breathing remained steady. He couldn't let them spot him. His mission was clear: gather intel on the rogue faction's plans and eliminate the threat. But now, with these new players entering the scene, his task had become even more complicated. The two men spread out, moving in opposite directions, searching the warehouse for signs of intrusion. The ghost knew he had to act quickly. He had to neutralize them before they became a bigger problem. But he also had to be careful. He couldn't afford to leave any evidence of his presence. Every move had to be calculated, every decision precise. The first agent came within arm's reach. His back was turned, unaware of the ghost's presence in the shadows. The ghost's training kicked in. With a swift motion, he stepped out from behind the crate, closing the gap between them in seconds. The agent didn't even have time to react before the ghost had his hand over the man's mouth, pinning him against a nearby wall. The agent struggled briefly, but the ghost's grip was like iron. The agent's eyes widened in shock, but before he could make a sound, the ghost's other hand moved swiftly to his neck, delivering a precise, non-lethal strike that left the agent unconscious in an instant. Without a second glance, the ghost dragged the agent's body behind a stack of crates and moved on, not missing a beat. He had no time to waste. His eyes scanned the room, looking for the second agent. He found him quickly, still searching the far corner of the warehouse, oblivious to the fate of his comrade. This agent was closer to the central structure, the one surrounded by the lab-coated workers. The ghost knew this was where the real action was, where the critical information lay. But the second agent was in his way. Moving swiftly but silently, the ghost navigated the shadows, using the crates as cover. He could hear the agent's footsteps getting closer, his breathing growing louder as he neared the spot where the ghost had already neutralized the first man. The agent turned, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. It was a split second, too fast for the agent to react. But it was enough for the ghost to make his move. The ghost lunged forward, his body moving like a blur. He grabbed the agent by the shoulders and slammed him into a nearby stack of crates. The agent's head hit the wood with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he even had a chance to draw his weapon. The ghost didn't waste any time. He tied the agent up quickly, using a set of zip ties he kept in his vest for situations just like this. He didn't want any surprises. The fewer people who knew about his presence, the better. With both agents neutralized, the ghost took a moment to assess the situation. The workers around the central structure were still unaware of the danger. He couldn't afford to alert them yet. His primary objective remained unchanged: find out what the rogue faction was building in the warehouse, and stop them from completing it. But now, there was something else on his mind. The sudden appearance of these Black Ops agents. Something told him they weren't just after the same information. They were here for the weapon, whatever it was, and they were willing to do anything to get it. The ghost knew the stakes had just been raised. He had to find out what they were building and stop it, but he had to be cautious. The more he learned, the more dangerous the situation became. This wasn't just about a rogue faction. It was about a much larger threat to humanity. The Black Ops agents were the tip of the iceberg, and the ghost had to figure out who was pulling the strings before it was too late. He moved silently toward the center of the room, where the metallic structure loomed ominously. As he got closer, he could see the workers huddled around it, their eyes fixed on the intricate machinery. There was no time to waste. He had to get closer, gather the intel he needed, and then destroy whatever it was before it could be used. The fate of humanity rested in his hands, and he wasn't going to let anyone, whether rogue agents or government conspirators, stop him from completing the mission. As the ghost inched closer, his pulse quickened. The answers were within reach, but so were the enemies. And now, with his every step, he was racing against time, and against forces far more dangerous than anything he had ever faced. The ghost crouched low behind a stack of crates, his eyes fixed on the group of workers gathered around the strange metallic structure. His mind raced with the possibilities. What were they building? And why was it so important that rogue agents, Black Ops operatives, were willing to risk everything to secure it? The air in the warehouse felt thick with tension, and the weight of his mission pressed down on him like a heavy burden. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. He studied the workers carefully. Their faces were impassive, focused solely on their task. They didn't look like scientists or engineers. They looked like pawns, pieces in a much larger game. The ghost's instincts told him that they weren't fully aware of what they were creating. They were simply following orders, trapped in a system far beyond their understanding. And yet, whatever it was they were building, it was too dangerous to be left unchecked. The metallic structure in the center of the room hummed softly, its sleek surface reflecting the dim light of the warehouse. It looked like a piece of advanced technology, something that shouldn't exist in a place like this, hidden away in plain sight. The ghost had seen weapons before. He had been part of a project that created some of the deadliest soldiers ever known. But this was different. This was something new. Something that felt wrong in a way he couldn't quite explain. He glanced at the unconscious bodies of the two Black Ops agents he had taken down earlier. They were secure for now, but the longer he lingered, the greater the risk of someone else discovering them. The ghost knew that time was running out. He had to act, and he had to act fast. But he couldn't just rush in without knowing what he was dealing with. The information he gathered now could mean the difference between success and failure. Taking a deep breath, the ghost reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, his primary tool for gathering intel. It was a silent, high-tech surveillance drone, small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. He activated it, and the tiny drone hovered in the air before shooting silently toward the metallic structure. The ghost watched closely as the drone moved around the perimeter of the warehouse, feeding him live data as it went. His heart raced as he saw the drone's camera capture detailed images of the machinery. There it was. Embedded within the heart of the metallic structure was a series of complex wires and circuits, far beyond anything the ghost had ever seen. The tech was advanced, alien almost. The structure wasn't just a weapon. It was a device designed for something far more sinister. The ghost could feel the truth beginning to take shape in his mind. This was no ordinary weapon. This was a device that could alter the very fabric of human existence. The workers continued their task, unaware of the ghost's presence or the surveillance drone he had deployed. They moved with mechanical precision, inputting commands into the system, tweaking various components. But what struck the ghost most was the design of the structure itself. It was too perfect, too deliberate. This wasn't just a piece of advanced technology. It was the culmination of something far more dangerous. Whoever was behind this project had far-reaching plans, and they weren't just interested in power. They were interested in control. His heart pounded in his chest as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The Black Ops agents, the rogue faction, the mysterious technology, they were all connected. This wasn't just a matter of securing a weapon. This was about creating a tool that could bend the will of humanity to the will of a few. The ghost's grip tightened on his weapon, but he didn't draw it yet. He needed more time. He needed to understand exactly what this device was capable of before making his move. He couldn't afford to rush in blindly. If the rogue faction succeeded in completing this device, the consequences would be catastrophic. It wouldn't just be a weapon of mass destruction. It would be a weapon of control, capable of manipulating minds, bending the will of entire populations. The drone buzzed back to him, transmitting the last of its data. The ghost studied the information carefully, his mind piecing together the technology's purpose. It was a mind control device, a machine designed to hack into the neural pathways of individuals, to rewrite their thoughts and actions. It could turn anyone into a puppet, controlled by the will of its creators. And if it worked as intended, it could bring entire nations to their knees. The ghost's blood ran cold. This was no longer just a covert operation. This was the beginning of a nightmare. He couldn't let this machine fall into the wrong hands. The world as he knew it would be destroyed if it did. He had to stop it, and he had to stop it now. But as he prepared to make his move, the sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. The ghost's body tensed as he spun around, his senses on high alert. A shadow moved across the room, and a familiar figure stepped into the warehouse. A man in a black suit, his face sharp and calculating. The leader of the rogue faction. The ghost's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The man stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. He didn't seem to notice the unconscious agents or the strange activity in the warehouse. But the ghost knew that this was the man behind the project. This was the person who had set everything in motion. With his hand on the grip of his weapon, the ghost moved silently, slipping through the shadows. The time had come to confront the mastermind behind the operation. There could be no more waiting, no more hesitation. It was do or die, and the fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. The ghost's mind raced with strategy. He couldn't afford to underestimate this man. The leader was dangerous, cunning, and likely prepared for anything. But the ghost was more than ready. He had been trained for moments like this, and he would not fail. The fate of the world depended on him. With a final breath, the ghost stepped into the open, emerging from the shadows to face the leader of the rogue faction. This was the end of the line, the final showdown, and only one of them would walk away from it.